Welcome to all of you for our afternoon breakout session. We're so happy that you guys were able to come back and join us for this session today around healing through connection, pyramid model, and trauma-informed care. So my name is Allison Olivo, and I am happy to introduce Julia Sales, who is a research instructor with Georgetown University. Julia is a licensed mental health clinician who has spent the last decade serving early childhood populations through direct clinical work, training and technical assistance, and product development. Julia is a research instructor at Georgetown University, where she supports infant and early childhood systems of care, as well as training and technical assistance for the Head Start Center on Health, Behavioral Health, and Safety. Julia is also a member of the Pyramid Model Master Cadre for Massachusetts, where she supports pyramid model implementation across a variety of settings. So welcome, Julia, and we're excited for you to share your expertise with us today.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you all for joining this session. We are going to jump right into it, but my hope is that everyone here is here because they're interested in thinking about trauma-informed care. They're interested in the pyramid model and the connection between the two. And so my hope is if you have questions, if you have things that strike you, if you have things that you're like, I don't agree with this, please put it in the chat. I think it would be wonderful for us all to be able to connect with one another through the chat. And again, if there are any questions that pop up, please feel free to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A. So like Allison said, my name is Julia Sales. I've spent my entire career working with infants and early childhood. I've been a mental health consultant. I have done direct clinical care. I've supported training and technical assistance. And the reason that this topic is so important to me, especially as we think about early education and care settings, is because we have a really unique opportunity to not only make sure that we are being preventative and supporting all children through a trauma-informed lens, but to really think about how we push ourselves to move into this place of healing for kids we may know have experienced trauma, and have those strategies in place so that we can support every child and family who walks through our door, recognizing that we don't always know experiences that families and children have had prior to coming to us. So as we talk today, I want to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. So we're going to use some grounding strategies. We're going to hopefully model these. I would encourage you to take part and participate if you feel comfortable, but we'll be doing some different activities across our time together this afternoon to help us ground ourselves, to think about our own regulation, to think about our own wellness. And I would encourage you all to do what you need to do to take care of yourselves. We all come to this space with our own experiences. I know that talking about trauma can feel activating sometimes. I'm going to do my very best to make sure there are warnings before anything we talk about. And again, we're really living in this prevention space today. So hopefully most of what we talk about will feel like it has a positive lens to it as well, and an opportunity for us to really think about the power of relationships and how we support that. With that said, feel free to stand up, move around, feel free to connect with me or someone that you trust if there is something that's popping up for you after the session, and we will go ahead and jump into it. All right, so for our time together today, we're really going to be thinking about a little bit and grounding ourselves around trauma, how that can show up, what that can look like for young children, thinking about the importance and the connection between adult regulation and how that supports healing, as well as how we promote connection and power of relationship through regulation and co-regulation. So we're going to spend some time there today. We're going to think about trauma-informed care in the pyramid model. So often, those of you who are familiar with the pyramid model know that one of its foundational tenets is that it is inherently trauma-informed. So the strategies, the pyramid model practices are built in a way to be trauma-informed. And I think that is so important because we know that early educators are stressed right now. They're stressed, they have a lot on their plate. And sometimes when we come in and we're saying, here, do the pyramid model to promote social emotional competencies and be trauma informed, it can feel like we're piling on. And so one of the connections that I love to make is that when we are doing the trauma and when we are doing the pyramid model practices, when we're implementing pyramid model, we are also supporting trauma informed care. And we're going to dive a little deeper into some of the resources that are available to really make that connection and really think about how these pyramid model practices are supporting trauma informed care as we go. Thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's wonderful to see you all here, so I really appreciate that. So let's just do a brief definition of what is trauma. And I like this definition because it's pretty broad. And trauma is something that is highly individualized. It's an experience that is really dependent on an individual. It's dependent on some of the supports that individual may have. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. So this is the definition we at Georgetown like to use. It says, trauma occurs when frightening events or situations overwhelm someone's ability to cope or deal with what's happened. And so sometimes what I hear when I go out to programs is, well, you know what, these two children have experienced the same exact thing and this child is fine. So I don't understand why this child is having such a hard time, right? And this definition really helps us to think about that individualization of experiences, to think about what supports that child may have, and to think about their temperament, to think about how we are really looking through that trauma-informed lens to say, is this child overwhelmed? Are they not able to bounce back? Are they frightened? Are they fearful? Is that the place that they are stuck in this moment because of what experiences they have had? We know for young children that relationships are critical when we think about experiences of trauma. One, to understand what may have happened for that child and how that might impact their view of the world and of themselves. And two, to really think about how we support them in healing. So we know the number one best way that we can promote healing for any child, if we know that they've experienced trauma, is through one supportive, nurturing, connected adult relationship. And so I know through my work that for so many kids that you all serve, or for those of you who are in a role where you're supporting adults who are supporting children, really honing in on the power of relationship, the power of connection, that is our number one thing that we want to be focusing on. We often like to say, for young children, hurts often happen through relationship and healing happens through relationship. And so how are we really thinking about fostering those connected, safe, nurturing relationships as one of the best ways that we can support trauma-informed care? So let's think a little bit together, and I'd love to hear from you all in the chat, but we know that trauma and experiences of trauma can really impact behavior. And we often know that we don't always know the experiences that young children have had when they're coming to us. We know that most families, when you're doing some type of intake, often are not the most forthcoming if you have just met this family for the first time in sharing all the details of their experience. Some are, some aren't. And so as we go today, we're going to talk about why it's so important to be trauma-informed, because when we're thinking about trauma-informed care, we're really holding that we don't need to know an individual's life history and every single detail and experience that they've had. That can be incredibly helpful. But when we're being trauma informed, we're really thinking about a set of practices that are going to support every single child that we work with. And that's really going to hold up those kids that we know or don't know have experienced trauma. But just as we're thinking about behavior, because I know behavior is probably one of the biggest topics that comes up when we're thinking about young children, it can be really important and helpful for us to understand the impacts that trauma can have on behavior. So when young children have experienced trauma, they often have a really hard time with regulation. And so we see them cycling through externalized behaviors or really deep withdrawn behaviors. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. We also know that for our kids who've experienced trauma, paying attention can be really difficult, staying focused can be really difficult, being attuned in relationships can be really difficult. So things like being able to maintain friendships can be tricky. How many of you know that child where they are great? They're doing awesome if they are in control of every single detail of the play that they're doing. As soon as someone says, no, I don't want to be a hamster in the family, I want to be an iguana, they completely lose it. And the whole play scheme goes down the drain. Oftentimes what happens is when kids are starting to lose that control over and over again with peers, what we see are peers start to say, I don't really want to play with that child, or it's hard for me to be in relationship. And so we know that that same thing can play out with adults too. And oftentimes that's a pattern that we see. We also know that for young kids who've experienced trauma, controlling their impulses can be really hard. So I have that feeling, I feel it, and I go right to acting. And when we are thinking about supporting young children and being able to maintain some regulation, or thinking about how they can slow their system down a little bit to not be as reactive, we're really thinking about how are we helping young children to go from feeling to thinking to acting. So I would be curious, have any of you all worked with a child who goes from 0 to 100? And you can pop it into the chat. Any people support a child, have supported a child, have supported a teacher where they are like, this kid, I'm good. I am tearing everything off the walls. I'm hitting everyone in sight. I'm swiping every single surface that there is to swipe. Okay, I'm seeing lots of yeses in the chat. Philip, I hear you. Yes, every single day, right? And so when we think about this, when we think about our kids who go from 0 to 100, it can be really helpful to look through that trauma-informed lens. One, to understand what experiences they may have had, and two, to really think about how we start to leverage our relationship with them to slow them down a little bit. Our kids who are going from 0 to 100 move directly from feeling to acting. There is no thinking in the middle. And the pyramid can really help to support us in using their practices, especially those tier 2 practices, and thinking about how we build up some of those regulation skills, those emotional regulation skills, those behavioral regulation skills, to say, we're going to go from feeling this really big feeling to having a strategy that can help us to promote our thinking and then to move towards acting. And what I always like to highlight here is sometimes when we are starting to implement some of those strategies, what we see is that child hits that really big feeling, I'm so angry. We see them ball up their fists. There's a little pause there, and then they still hit someone. And we're like, oh, well, the strategy is not working. Look, the strategy isn't working. Let's abandon it. To me, as a clinician, when I see that, I say, oh, we're on the right track. There was a pause there. The thinking was online. Maybe we haven't practiced that strategy just enough yet, or maybe we need some more repetition with it. But wow, we are not just going from feeling to acting. There was that pause, that thinking was there. So I like to highlight that, especially for you all who are supporting kids in this situation, supporting other teachers or adults who are supporting kids who are 0 to 100 kids, to really think about how are we promoting that regulation, and how are we recognizing that so often when we are building these skills, it takes a long time. When a child, especially a child who's experienced trauma, has been doing something the same way for a very long time, or their system is highly reactive to things that are happening in the environment, things like touches, sounds, smells, things like visual stimuli, things like an ambulance driving by and that siren really activates them, or someone unexpectedly touches them on the shoulder and all of a sudden they are going back to a place where it feels unsafe or it feels scary for them. This can take a long time to start to say, I can be your safe person. I can be relationally safe for you, and I can create an environment that is safe for you as well. And so we're going to talk a lot about relational safety and environmental safety today as we go, because I think that those are two places that we know are critical to support all children, especially kids who've experienced trauma, and the pyramid model practices can really help to promote that. Before we jump into more of the pyramid model, let's think a little bit about what's happening in the brain when we have kids who start to get dysregulated. How many of you feel like regulation is like the new buzzword? Like, if they could just be a little more regulated, I think we need to work on self-regulation skills. If we're able to regulate in this moment, we're going to see so much progress. Is anyone writing goals around regulation, self-regulation, talking about regulation a lot? If you can pop it in the chat, that would be great. I think it's something that is coming into prime time in a bigger way than it has maybe in the last decade, the last 15 years. I feel like we weren't talking about regulation as much. And so we're going to spend a little time this afternoon really thinking about the connection between adult regulation and child regulation. So yes, Erin, yes, that regulation for students and staff alike. So what we know and what the early childhood field is so good at promoting is that we can't have regulated children. Kids can't build self-regulation skills unless they have had enough co-regulation. And co-regulation really comes from an adult who's regulated, an adult who has a trusting, nurturing, connected relationship with a child. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But I wanted to start by showing Dan Siegel's Flipping Our Lid. This is like our 101 for those of you who are like, I am not a neuroscientist. Me either, but this is the best way that I like to use to think about what is happening when kids are doing that 0 to 100. And the thing that's so great about this is we can think about it for ourselves as adults too. When we notice ourselves starting to get really dysregulated, when we notice ourselves starting to say, uh-oh, I am feeling unsafe in this situation, which I think happens often in classroom environments where a child is starting to have these really big unsafe behaviors, and all of a sudden the adult is feeling really unsafe too. Maybe they're feeling unsafe because they have physically been hurt before in the classroom. Maybe they're feeling unsafe because they're really worried about how am I going to keep the other kids in the room safe. Maybe they're worried or feeling unsafe because they're so worried about this child in front of them and keeping them safe. And so we know that it can be really dysregulating for both the child and an adult when we have these trauma responsive behaviors that start to come up. So we're going to go ahead and think about what's happening in the brain. So we can start by making a number 4. So if you go ahead and you put your thumb sort of to your palm, we can think about how the brain is built. And the brain is really built from the bottom up and the inside out. So if you think about your wrist and you think about your palm, that is your brainstem. And your brainstem is going to hold all of your automatic response, right? So things like, sometimes people call it the reptilian brain, all the things that you need to be able to breathe, to be able to survive, your heartbeat, your breathing, your temperature control, right? All of that is housed in our brain. And what's also housed in our brainstem is our fight, flight, and freeze response, our survival responses. Those 3 big responses that are highlighted and that are in us to say, you're not safe, keep yourself safe, keep yourself safe, keep yourself safe, right? And so when we are down here in our brainstem, we are having an automatic response. And fight, flight, or freeze are those automatic responses that can come up when we are super stressed, when we are feeling unsafe, or when there is a trauma reactive behavior happening. When we start to close our fingertips over our brainstem, we can think about our fingernails here in kind of our fist as our frontal cortex. Our frontal cortex holds all of that really important information to be thinking about our planning, our executive functioning, our working memory, right? It helps us to think about how we are regulating our emotions and our behaviors so that we can stay regulated and we can remember the rules and we can think about how we're feeling and we can say how we're feeling. All of that happens up here in our frontal cortex. And when our frontal cortex is online, it's important that we are here in our frontal cortex for any learning to happen, right? So if we want to remember information, if we want to retain that information, we've got to be up here in our frontal cortex. So what happens when kids or adults become super dysregulated? We go from being in our frontal cortex to flipping our lid, and all of a sudden we're down here in our brainstem and we're in fight, flight, or freeze. And so sometimes what I see when I go into programs, when I go into classrooms, is a child is down here in fight, flight, or freeze, and we're still trying to teach them like they're up here in their frontal cortex. When we're down here in our brainstem, we really have to leverage thinking about our co-regulation. How are we as an adult showing up to say, I'm here for you. I'm here in the context of relationship, and my number one job and my only job is to help you re-regulate in this moment. So I'm not going to do things like, say, go to the calm down corner by yourself. Because I know when you're down here in fight, flight, or freeze, you can't calm down by yourself. You need that adult there to be with you, to be connected with you. I'm not going to say things like, well, don't you remember the rules? We clean up every single day after circle time or after center time. We always do this. Don't you remember? We do it every day. So why are you having a hard time today? Because I know that when a child is down here in fight, flight, or freeze, they can't hear any of that. All they're hearing is like the Peanuts teacher, right? What they can experience is that deep connection, that attunement, me being there with them so that they can inhale a little bit of my calm or their energy if they need to. And when we are able to do that nice relational co-regulation, what we see is we are able to help a child get back into their frontal cortex, their thinking brain, where they can be regulated, where they can process what has happened, where we can review, okay, so you just got so angry. You got so angry and you threw all the blocks. Oh, that was hard. What can we do next time? But we have to wait till a child is back here in their frontal cortex to be able to do that type of processing work. And if we're trying to do that down here when they're in fight, flight, or freeze, often what we see is the behavior continues on and on and on. Has anyone had that example where we are just talking a whole lot when kids are down here and it feels like it's escalating the behavior? Feel free to pop in the chat if that's something you've seen, if that's something you've done. I will raise my hand and say, I've done that before, right? And oftentimes it's coming from a place of me feeling a little overwhelmed, me feeling a little helpless, me not quite sure what to do in that moment to support that child. And so I want to name that. I want to validate that. I want to recognize that that's a really common experience, right? And so a few tips that I have that you all can put in your pocket too, that I use with my own kids, with kids that I'm supporting, with teachers that I'm supporting, is thinking about if a child has flipped their lid and they are down here in that brainstem in fight, flight, or freeze, we want to be thinking about using 10 words or less, 10 seconds or less when we're talking to them. We want to give wait time. We want to give some pause, and we want to be connected with them. We want to make sure we are there with them, that we are doing that nice co-regulation, and that we are staying there and not just leaving them on their own. So let's talk a little bit more about regulation, because regulation is really a key thing that we want to support every single young child we're working with to strengthen. And we know it's critically important for our kids who've experienced trauma, because when a child who's experienced trauma again has one of those activators, when they have that feeling of, oh, something's scary, something's making me feel unsafe, and sometimes they can't tell us, they can't say, oh, you know what, an ambulance went by and that sound is reminding me of a time that an ambulance came to my house and something really scary happened. A lot of times kids don't have that language to be able to put that in context. So what we see is it looks like the behavior is coming out of nowhere, and it feels like the behavior is happening all the time. And sometimes we can inadvertently be trauma triggers for young kids, not because we are intentionally trying to, but because we might be touching them and it's a big surprise for them, or it feels really uncomfortable for them. It could be the tone of our voice. I have seen it where it is the smell of perfume that a teacher is wearing, and that really activates a child. So we just want to be aware. We want to be curious. We want to be thinking about that as we are thinking about supporting all kids, but especially our kids that we know have experienced trauma, and then using that tool within our trauma-informed lens as well. So let's talk a little bit about regulation. I like to talk about regulation like a house, and it's really important that we are connecting this and thinking about this not only for kids, but for adults too. And so we know that when that lid is flipped, because there's been an experience that says, I feel unsafe, I need to protect myself, And we're down here in our brainstem, our fight, flight, or freeze. We are dysregulated. We are not up here in our good thinking brain. And so another way we can think about that is really thinking about regulation like a house. So you can see in this image, we have 2 floors of a house where some good living happens. We like to call this your zone of tolerance. When you're in your zone of tolerance, you can hit stressful events, you can hit hard feelings, you can hit things that are a little distressing to your system, but you're able to stay in your house. You're able to stay in your 2 floors of living, and that means you're up here in your frontal cortex. So you're able to access skills, things like being able to take a deep breath, things like asking for help, things like walking away, right? All of that, when that is occurring, you're still in those 2 good floors of living. So what happens when we fly through the roof or we fall through the basement? That's where we say we're dysregulated. So when we fly through the roof, we are hyper aroused, and that means fight or flight are being activated in our system. So oftentimes the behaviors we see correspond with that fight or flight. So we fly through the roof, we may see in young kids, we may see them hitting, kicking, spitting, biting. We may see them bolting or eloping. When we think about falling through the basement, we're really thinking about functional freeze. And so this is where we see kids start to shut down. They might go silent. They might be crawling under that table and staying there. They may look like they're engaged in the activity, but when we really sit down and we observe them, we see that they're not singing along with songs. They aren't engaging with other people. They aren't actively playing with toys, right? It's like they're zoned out or blank. Carissa, yes, I think we need to talk more about our functional freezers. So what happens is, because when we are flying through the roof, often that's an externalized behavior. Those are often the places our eye directly goes. If I'm sitting at circle time and I'm in functional freeze, but I'm just sitting there crisscross, people probably aren't going to say, whoa, we're really worried about Julia. And so how are we actively looking at our kids who are falling through the basement too? The big thing here is, whether you're falling through the basement or you're flying through the roof, you are just as dysregulated, right? And I always share this example that we can think about this for adults too. So how many of you have gone into a classroom before and you're like, what is happening in this classroom? There is some tension in here between the adults. I don't know what has happened, but I am feeling the tenseness. You are seeing adults who aren't talking to one another at all. You may be seeing adults who are rolling their eyes at each other. You may be seeing adults who, when they are talking in a really harsh tone to one another. Has anyone experienced this before, where you walk in and you're like, I don't know what's happening here, but something's happening, right? We need to make sure we're addressing that, right? That is telling us that adult regulation, something is occurring between that relationship with those adults, and they are not regulated in that moment, in that relationship. And when we layer that on to think about how important adult regulation is, if those adults are interacting that way, that is the number one model for the young kids in our program. When we think about this through a trauma-informed lens, if kids are seeing adults respond this way, immediately, especially kids who've experienced trauma, are going to go and say, I've done something wrong. I've done something and these adults are upset and it's my fault, right? Because developmentally young kids are still egocentric. They think, oh, I must have done something to make this upset. And so oftentimes that can be a huge trigger for behaviors we see, just how the adults are and how they are interacting with one another. And so if we see it, it can be so hard to address, but it's critical that we address it as we're thinking about our trauma-informed lens. So what happens for adults, right? We have adults who fly through the roof, and we also have adults who fall through the basement. I will self-disclose, I am a fly through the roof girly. So when I get really upset, and usually this does not happen at work, right? It happens more at home. I like to save it up for my safe people at home. I am that person who maybe uses a harsher tone of voice, or I get a little bit louder, or I'm stomping around a little bit, right? You can tell that I'm upset. My husband, he's a fall through the basement guy. So when he gets upset, he just starts to shut it down. He dissociates. He's like, I'm not here right now. So we look really different. He looks super calm, but he is just as dysregulated as me, who's super upset. And you can tell that I'm upset. And because I'm a therapist by training, he loves to point out, like, oh, Julia, you're getting so dysregulated, right? You're flying through that roof right now. And I have to remind him, you are just as dysregulated when you're falling through that basement. It just looks really different. The big point here, though, is adults need that co-regulation often to help them get back into those 2 good floors of living as well. So adults need that relationship. They need that person to say, hey, I'm up here on the roof saying, help me get back into the house, right? And if the other person that I'm relying on to help me do that is all the way in the basement, they're like, I can't, I'm way down here. I'm in the basement. I can't help you either. And the reason I like to talk about this like a house is because when we introduce this to adults in early education and care, they can quickly identify usually if they are a fly through the roof or if they're a fall through the basement person. Generally, we have one direction we go. And if anyone wants to share in the chat, if you're more of a fly through the roof or fall through the basement person, please feel free to do that. But starting with the adults, starting to reflect and recognize what happens to me as an adult when I get dysregulated is so important, because then we can put strategies in place. Then we can think about the supports that are needed in order to help us get back into that house, right? We can start to preventatively say, I feel myself, I'm climbing the stairs to the attic. I can feel myself starting to get, the stress. And that can help us to say, I need to tap out before I'm all the way through the roof. Or I'm knocking on the basement door. I'm about to dissociate and I don't want to do that. I need to tap out, or I need to go wipe down the tables for a minute and take a break, right? And that can help us to think about how we do that as well. And I thank you all for sharing. In the chat here, I see a lot like this, Carissa. The roof is on fire. Yes. And I also see people saying that they're down in the basement. This can look different between our workplace and our home place. What I hear a lot is sometimes people say, I'm a real fall through the basement at work, but at home, I am fly through the roof. And again, this can just be a way that we can start to normalize that this happens for all of us. Early education and care is an extremely stressful position. We know that there's a high demand. Oftentimes there's low control. We know that we're dealing with a multitude of needs at any given time. We're supporting behaviors, we're teaching, we're doing all sorts of things all at once, and it's stressful. It's really stressful. And the more we can start to talk about, here I am, I'm noticing in my own body, I'm starting to go through that roof or that basement, that can help us to strengthen our own emotional and behavioral regulation skills as an adult. And that also can really help to model and think about how we're able to show up as co-regulators for the kids that we're supporting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about how regulation is built, and we're really going to highlight and focus on co-regulation here. So like I said, we all come into the world with auto-regulation, right? That's down in that brain stem. Those are things like our heartbeat, breathing. The sucking reflex is one of the very first auto-regulatory reflexes we have. For any adults out there, anyone a foot tapper or a pen clicker and you don't even realize you're doing it, you're just sort of doing it, that can be an auto-regulating thing. So I want to pause here for a second. Why is the sucking reflex so important for a baby? You can pop it in the chat. Why is it important that a baby has the sucking reflex? Yes, Jennifer, it keeps them alive, right? They have to have that sucking reflex in order to be able to eat. So it's also one of the very first ways that infants start to self-soothe. So what do we see when babies get upset? Oftentimes they go to suck their thumb or they suck a pacifier. What does this look like for our preschoolers? How many of you have worked with a kid and you're like, why is your shirt wet? Why is your shirt wet up here? Why are your cuffs wet? Why is the tip of your hair wet? We see some kids when they are feeling stressed, when they are feeling that stress, they go back to one of the very first ways that they were able to auto-regulate, which is that sucking reflux, right? So it's important that we recognize that. We want to live in a place of co-regulation. So for any of our kids who are in early childhood, self-regulation skills are an emerging skill set. We would not expect our 4, 5, 6-year-olds to have self-regulation skills. And I think sometimes this is a place where we need to check ourselves, where we need to support other people, teachers, in thinking about what is developmentally appropriate for young kids. And so as we think about self-regulation skills, that is an emerging skill set for our 5-year-olds, for our 6-year-olds. But where we really want to live is in co-regulation. And so that's really the idea of being able to use our relationship to either calm a system down or to energize a system if that's what's needed. And the key here is that we have to have that safe, trusting, connected relationship in order to show up as a co-regulator. And we have to be regulated as an adult ourselves. So what does this look like? I always use the example. I'm an early childhood person. I've spent my entire career in early childhood. When I had my first baby, I was humbled, right? Everyone's like, you're going to be a great mom. You do this all the time. Woo, it was hard. I was so tired. And I'm sitting here with all this information, like, be a co-regulator, Julia, co-regulate your baby, right? Do that through rocking them, through shh, 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 through patting their back, right? But I had some of these moments where I was doing all the co-regulating things and my baby had different ideas. And as I was trying to regulate him and do all those things, what was happening? My arms were starting to stiffen, my heart rate was increasing, my temperature was going up, and my baby was cueing off of that. And he was saying, you don't feel good? I don't feel good either. Right. And so then, my husband or my friend would walk in and they'd say, here, give me the baby, take a break for a second. So I'd pass them the baby. And what does he do? He stops crying immediately. And what do? I go into an immediate shame spiral. I'm like, well, I guess he's yours now because I can't co-regulate him. And I know how important that is. And so here we are. What's happening though is when we are stressed, that child, no matter what strategies we're using, we can say the right words, we can have a big bright face, we can model the deep breathing. If we are not regulated, that young child is going to pick up on that and they are going to continue to be dysregulated. So adult regulation, adult wellness is critical as we are thinking about trauma-informed care. I forgot to mention this on the last slide, but we think about those 2 floors of that house. Already young kids, when they're coming to us, they're coming with like 1 floor, right? They don't have a whole 2 floors built. We build their floors up through co-regulation. Our kids who've experienced trauma, they're coming to us with like half a floor. And so we see them fly through the roof, fall through the basement, fly through the roof, fall through the basement a lot because they don't have a very big place. They don't have many floors to land on to stay regulated. And one of the best gifts that we can give every single child, but especially kids who've experienced trauma, is through co-regulation, we can start to stretch those floors of living so that they have more space where they get to be up here in their frontal cortex, where they're able to be regulated, where they're able to feel safe and connected, and they're able to learn these really amazing skills. Okay, so the other thing that we want to hold as we're thinking about our kids who may have experienced trauma or just thinking through our trauma-informed lens is that we know that these really hard early experiences impact how kids think, how they behave, how they feel. So you can think for a second, and I would encourage you all to share in the chat. Think about a backpack that kids are coming to you wearing. It's an invisible backpack, but they have this backpack on, right? Think about how we want kids to feel. How do we want them to feel about themselves? How do we want them to feel about the adults who care for them? How do we want them to feel about relationships and connection? If you can just pop that in the chat. So we're going to start. How do we want kids to feel? How do we want them to feel about themselves? How do we want them to feel about the adults who care for them? How do we want them to feel about their classroom? Yes, Jennifer, we want them to feel safe and loved and connected and capable. We want them to feel positive, important, loved, connected. I love this word connected. We want them to feel valued. Yes, all of these things. What we know is that for young kids who've experienced trauma, we want them to, thank you, Chris, we want them to feel seen and heard and understood. Yes, confident. What we know is that young kids who've experienced trauma often are coming to us with a really negative self concept. They don't have good self esteem. They're saying, I'm a bad boy. I'm a bad girl. I'm a bad child, right? They are coming to us already at the age of 3, 4, 5, and they are self identifying as I'm bad. And oftentimes that's because of experiences that they've had. They're saying, I can't trust that adults are going to keep me safe. I can't trust that adults are going to show up and meet my needs when I need them to. And they're coming with a worldview of saying the world doesn't care about me. I'm not lovable. I'm not likable. And so we have a really huge opportunity because young children are with us so many hours of the day to think about how we repack this backpack. How do we recognize that trauma's impacts have this self concept for young children, and that we, just through the power of our relationship, just by being intentional, can start to say, you are safe. I know you might not be safe everywhere, but when you are here in this classroom, in this learning environment, you are safe. I'm an adult who can keep you safe. I'm an adult who can meet your needs. I'm an adult who's going to show up and who's going to like you. I'm an adult who, when we have a hard moment, I'm going to connect with you. I'm going to repair with you. I'm going to let you know that I still love you, that I still like you, that I still care about you, that you are still so important in this space. And the more we're able to do that through the relationship, that is what can really help to support brain development, especially in this critical 0 to 6 age range where we know the brain has such an opportunity to change with such little effort, that we can start to rewire, we can start to build new neurosynaptic connections and pathways that say, I know some really hard, scary things have happened for you in the past. I know you may have some pathways in your brain right now that are saying, adults can't keep me safe. Adults can't keep me safe. I don't feel good here. I don't feel safe here. But I also know that through my relationship with you, I can start to build even stronger neuroconnected pathways that say, you are safe. You are liked. You are loved. I am a safe adult. I am going to show up for you. You can have friends. We are going to be connected together. And the cool thing is that when pruning happens around the age of 12 to 14, the stronger those neurosynaptic pathways are, those are the ones that are going to be kept. So if we're intentional about using our relationship to really think about how we repack this backpack for young kids, we are literally building new connections in the brain that are going to be kept, and that some of those negative connections are going to be pruned away. And that's why it's so critical that we're thinking about trauma-informed care in the early childhood world. All right, so we're going to go ahead. We're going to practice a deep breath right here. We're going to take a little pause before we jump into the last bit of content. So this is called a lion breath. And I think sometimes we think about deep breathing as being like a really zenful, calm, quiet moment. But I am someone who likes some active deep breathing. I don't know about you all, but sometimes, has anyone felt a little stressed maybe in the past couple weeks? You can feel it pop into the chat if you felt any stress. This is one of my favorite breaths to do. And what I love about it is I think it's really cathartic for me as an adult when I'm feeling stressed. And it's a great way to model and to engage kids and thinking about deep breathing too. So a lot of times when we talk about wellness or self-care, we're not thinking about strategies we can use in the moment when we are actually with kids in the classroom. And this is one that we can do. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and sit with your feet on the floor. You're going to sort of arch your shoulders, roll them back, sort of arch your back. We're going to do a big inhale through our nose. And when we exhale, we're going to lift our chin up to the sky. We're going to stick our tongue out as far as we can, and we're going to roar. Okay, so I can't see you all, but I'm going to trust that you are joining in with me. And for anyone who is walking by your office right now, apologies in advance. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to do 2 lion breaths. Big inhale through your nose, chin up, tongue out. Ah. Let's do one more. Big inhale through your nose. Chin up. Exhale out. Ah. Okay. So again, these are strategies that we can model with kids, we can practice with kids, and they can be a way for us to have a release of some of that stress when I am like, oh, I am knocking on that attic's door, I'm about to fly through the roof. Doing 2 lion breaths, doing something that is externalized can be really, really helpful. And for me, a quiet Zenful breath is not as helpful as I can do kind of a appropriate release of some of that emotion. All right. So I want us to think here for a second as well. And this comes from Dr. Bruce Perry's work, who is a pioneer in the field. He really thinks a lot about working with young kids, working with children who've experienced trauma. He recently wrote a book with Oprah, so he is out there. But he's identified 6 R's that can really support the capacity to heal from trauma. And I think what is so amazing is that these 6 R's are things we do all the time in early childhood education. And so it starts with being relational. We have to create relational safety. We have to create environmental safety. Those are the 2 pillars of being able to support young children in building their capacity to heal from trauma. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing has some type of rhythm to it. So if we think back to that co-regulation, if we think about what we do to calm down a baby, everything we're doing is repetitious and it has rhythm. We don't just like pat the baby once on the back and expect them to calm down, right? We're patting them over and over. We're doing that bounce with them. We're rocking them back and forth. We don't just say shh and expect them to calm down. We repeat it, shh, shh, shh. So it's rhythmic, it's repetitive, it's done in relationship. I'm holding that baby close to me. It's respectful, right? It's relevant, it's developmentally appropriate. And when we're thinking about our young kids, I want us to think about the importance of songs, of music, of play. These inherently hold these 6 R's, right? When kids are playing, it's rewarding for them. It's fun for them. We can do different activities where it feels rhythmic and repetitious. So if you watch kids play, think about them building with magnet tiles, for instance. A lot of times we build, it crashes down. We build, it crashes down. There tends to be some inherent rhythm there, some repetition in it. It's done oftentimes by playing with another kid, right? And so we can think about some of these natural opportunities as ways to notice, ways to be curious, and ways to promote that capacity to heal. We can also think about more teacher-directed activities to support this as well. So we're going to go ahead and play a quick game together and think about these 6 R's as we're playing this game. Does this game have these 6 R's? Think about other games you might play with young kids or that you might encourage teachers to do during transitions, to do during group time. There are lots of fun things that we can do that are going to, again, help to support that capacity to heal from trauma. So this game is called Up, Down, Stop, Go. I'm going to encourage you all to play with me to stay awake after lunch. So when I say up, you're going to raise your hands up. When I say down, you're going to put your hands on your knees. Okay, so let's practice that. Up, down, up, down. All right, you all are brilliant. You've mastered that. So we're going to add in 2 more directions. When I say stop, you're going to make a stop sign in front of you. When I say go, you're going to do a run in place. Okay, stop, go, stop, go. All right, and now we're going to put it all together. Everyone ready? Here we go. Stop, up, down, go, down, up, stop, go, up, down, go, stop. Amazing. You all are brilliant. So if I'm doing this with young kids, we do this for a while. We just stay in the up, down, stop, go. Think about this game. Is there some repetition there? is there some rhythmicity? If we were all together doing this in a group, do we have that relational connection? Does it feel developmentally appropriate? Does it feel like it would be fun? There are lots of ways we can do this. So you all are adults, so we're going to make it a little trickier. And the cool thing about this game is if you play it enough over the course of the year, especially with our preschoolers, we can start to see them have that cognitive flexibility to grow along with the game. So we had our up, our down, our stop, and our go. And now we're going to turn it into a game of opposites. Okay, so when I say up, you're going to touch your knees. You're going to go down. When I say down, you're going up. When I say stop, you're going to go. And when I say go, you're going to stop. So you're going to do the opposite. All right, is everyone ready? Here we go. Down, up, stop, go, stop, go, down, up, go, stop, up, down, up, down, go, stop. All right. Did anyone play along? Did anyone giggle at themselves? Was that hard to do? The neat thing about that is when we play a game the same way over and over, so everyone's pretty familiar with the up, the down, the stop, the go, right? We start to activate cognitive flexibility when we turn this game into a game of opposites. And that is huge for the flexibility and thinking about being able to take concepts, to be able to think about rules, I love that, Elizabeth, that your kids are giggling at you, to be able to think about different activities. We change the rules a little bit and kids are still able to follow along. They're able to start to flex that different part of their brain in practice. And that is huge as we think about regulation, as we think about running into unexpected roadblocks and being able to activate that cognitive flexibility. Our working memory is coming online. It can be a great tool to support that executive functioning. And I will pop into the chat before we leave today a link. If you like those videos, there's 3 other videos that are on headstart.gov. They're called Adult Recess, and I think they're wonderful for adults to try out in staff meetings and thinking about how play can highlight our own joy, can help us to think about our own 6 R's for ourselves, and then think about how we really start to support this for kids and think about other opportunities across the day or activities that we might already be doing that highlight these 6 R's that are going to build this capacity to heal from trauma. So we're going to transition just a little bit now to think about trauma-informed care a little bit more, and then we're going to walk into some of the pyramid model resources that are available. Oh, but before we do that, let's have a quick little chat. I'd love to hear from you all. What are you currently doing within your role or within your program or your workplace to think about supporting trauma-informed care? We'll just give a little pause here. Are there things that you feel like are working really well? Are there things that even through our discussion today, you're like, oh yeah, we should be thinking a little bit more about this? Yes, Roseanne, trauma-informed classroom professional development, absolutely. So being able to have that knowledge base on what is trauma, how can it impact young kids, how can it impact us as adults? Yes, some more trainings. Thank you, Amber. Brain science, PD coaching, modeling mindfulness. Love this reflection. Yeah, how are we leveraging reflective practice or reflective supervision to help support, to promote trauma-informed through care throughout the district? I love that, Erin. Great. Yes, reflective supervision. We love reflective supervision. What an amazing way to build adult regulation capacity. We know reflection and regulation go hand in hand, and no one comes into this world fully regulated. It's a skill that we learn, and adults have their own experiences that can make it difficult for them to regulate. And so the more opportunities we have to reflect on it, to be able to practice, to be able to do that in the context of a safe relationship, the better we're able to show up and do that for kids, right? It's a parallel process. Amazing. Okay. Well, hopefully we have a few more resources that you can add to your toolkit. So let's think a little bit. We have our 6 tenets of trauma-informed care, and these come to us from SAMHSA. And so these are really thinking about, again, what are we doing? How are we weaving these into our policies, our procedures, sort of the culture of our program to make sure that we are showing up in a preventative way to ensure that every single child, family, staff member that we are in contact with has the opportunity to be trauma informed, to make sure that our responses, to make sure we're acknowledging that trauma exists, and to make sure that we are doing trauma informed practices. And these, again, just to highlight it, when we are being trauma informed, we don't need to know if people have experienced trauma or not. We do this preventatively, we do this proactively to ensure that when they come into our program, when they come into our environment, when they come into relationship with us, we are already doing this because it's best practice for all kids, and it's really going to support those kids who have experienced trauma. So the first one, no surprise here, is safety. We have to be thinking about relational safety. We have to be thinking about how we're creating environmental safety. One of the best places I love to use reflective practice, because oftentimes I go in to support teachers, to support programs when there are really big challenging behaviors occurring or some behavioral concerns occurring. And so oftentimes I go in and I say, my first question is, what's the relationship like? What is your relationship like with this child? And then the follow-up question is, how do you know? So oftentimes what I hear from the adult is like, I have a great relationship with them, or yeah, I still like them, even though they've bit me through the jeans, the last 4 days in a row or whatever. The next question I like to ask is, how do you know you have a great relationship with that child? What do you do? Or what does that child do that shows you have a really strong relationship? Sometimes what happens, especially when we have those really big behaviors or those trauma reactive pieces, is we start to show up, we are being professional, but we might feel a little dysregulated inside with that child. So we might feel like we're on the cusp of going through that roof or falling through that basement. And again, that child feels that, and it can really impact the relationship we have with them. And so thinking about how are we creating that environmental safety? How are we creating that physical safety is so huge. We want to hold trustworthiness and transparency as a huge tenet. So how are we making sure that our policies and our procedures and our interactions are rooted in transparency, are rooted in trust, are rooted in connection? Do I feel safe enough to tell my co-teacher, you know what, I'm having a really bad day today. I might need to tap out a little bit more. And do we have a culture in our workplace where they're like, you know what, I can give a little bit extra today because I trust that when I'm having a bad day, you're going to be able to show up for me. We're not living in a scarcity mindset, but we're living in that abundance mindset. We're saying we can lift each other up, recognizing that I'm not afraid that there's not going to be enough for me on the day that I need it. And sometimes when we're in trauma reactive environments, we get into this place of feeling like things are really scarce. We want to think about peer support. And this is huge for all kids, but especially our kids who've experienced trauma. How are we promoting friendships for them? Just like one of the biggest impacts that we can have as adults is having that connected relationship with a child who's experienced trauma to support their healing. Having a peer who likes them, not just tolerates them, but likes them, feels connected to them, can go miles and miles and miles. As a therapist who works with young kids, who has spent decades working with young kids who've experienced trauma, the number one thing that I do to support a child in their classroom, first, I start with their teacher and their relationship with that child. Second, I say, who is a peer who can be this child's friend? How do we integrate them and support them in their friendship skills? And a lot of times it takes a lot of scaffolding from us to be able to support them through that. But that connection is the best way to build self-esteem, to think about practicing all these social emotional skills that we know we want them to have, thinking about how we support them in further developing their own self-regulation skills or strengthening that window. And when we think about that backpack and how we start to repack that backpack, man, hearing like you are so cool to play with from a peer saying, I want to be Allison's partner, that goes so far, right? Like that's something that we can't always recreate as an adult when we are having that genuine connection with a peer. So thinking about how do we create those friendship skills is huge. Thinking about the idea of collaboration and mutuality. So how are we making sure that we are bringing families into this? How are we being trauma informed with families as well? So often we are like, yes, we are gung-ho about being trauma informed with our children, but are we thinking about staff members and are we thinking about families? How are we offering choices? How are we looking at staff behaviors, family behaviors through a trauma informed lens is so empowerment. Are we giving that space for voice, choice, and empowerment to kids, to families, and to staff members? And how do we know we're doing that? One of the best examples I like to use here is how many people have created like a beautiful behavior support plan for a child before, or supported a teacher in creating a really great individualized behavior support plan. Has anyone done that before? I'm sure most of you have. You can pop in the chat if you have, but I'm sure most of you are like, yes, I have done that before. How many of you actually review that plan with the child before you put it into place? So how many of you are sitting down with them and saying, hey, you know what, Allison, sometimes you get so angry, and I know it's scary for you, and I know it doesn't feel good for you. So this is the plan. This is what we're going to do. When you start to feel that big angry in your body, you are going to put your hands in your pocket and you're going to say, help, help, help. And I'm going to come running over and I'm going to be there to help you. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to try this, okay? And it's okay if it's not perfect at the beginning, but we're going to keep practicing and we're going to be trying that. So often we come up with a plan. All the adults are like, yep. Plan is awesome. All the adults are on the same page. We forget that it's really important that we are including the child in the plan. Are we reviewing the plan with them? Are we saying, does this sound okay to you? Are we making sure that the child is included in this? And sometimes it's not the plan that isn't working, it's that we've missed that step. Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that in the chat. Elizabeth just said that that step so often is missed, and it can be a critical step. So as we think about empowerment, voice, and choice, are we including families in the plan? Are we saying, hey, this is what we're thinking about to try at school. How does this sound for you? What do you think? You know your child best. Tell us, work with us, right? And then are we including the child in that plan? And of course, we want to make sure we're doing this all in the context of being respectful, of being thoughtful about a child and a family's culture and their experiences. All right, so as we think about how we promote trauma-informed care, we can think about how we adopt. We call these the 4 R's. We're all about the R's. We had our 6 R's with Bruce Perry and how to build the capacity to heal. And now we can really think about our 4 R's as we're thinking about adopting a trauma-informed lens. And the first R is realizing. So we want to realize how trauma impacts children, staff, families, and communities, and how trauma may show up in a community in an urban area versus a rural area might look different, right? I work in Boston. What trauma might look like in the community I work in might look really different than even outside of Boston, 3 towns out, right? So how do we realize that? How are we understanding that? And how do we hold that as we talk about trauma, we always want to be talking about resilience and healing. So they go hand in hand. A person is not an experience of trauma. A person is a complex individual, and everyone has the capacity to heal, has the capacity to be resilient, and we can support that through relationships for our kids who are young, our early childhood children. We want to recognize, we want to see behaviors through a trauma-informed lens and say, you know what, when I look at this behavior, it makes a ton of sense based on what I know about brain science. They flipped their lid right now. They are down in fight, flight, or freeze. This makes sense to me. I know that I need to show up and just co-regulate them. That's my only job, to be with them, to let them inhale my calm, or if they need a little bit of my energy, to let them inhale that. That's my job. we want to say, what's happened to this child instead of what's wrong with this child. And this one is really important to think about how we do that for families and for staff as well. I was working with a program recently and they were like, this parent is driving me nuts. Every single thing I do, they are frustrated about. I just got a call. They're mad that their child came home in wet socks. It's raining out, Julia. I don't know. They stepped on a puddle on the way to the bus. Their socks were dry when they left my classroom and now they're wet, right? This teacher was feeling so frustrated by this parent. And we had to slow down for a second. And we had to say, well, what do you think their experience has been? Why do you think it's so important for them to make sure their child has those dry socks, or that they are coming home and their shirt isn't wet, or that they really want to know every single thing that their kid had for lunch? What do you think could be happening for that parent that is making them feel this way, right? How do we start to shift or reframe? They're not just doing this to be annoying or to be trying to like call you out on like, how come X, Y, and Z isn't happening? Maybe it's because they didn't have that experience as a child. Maybe that's how they show up to say, I'm an engaged parent, right? So how do we use some of that reflective questioning to really think about not only for kids' behavior, but for adults' behavior too? Then we want to make sure that we're responding in a way where we have systems that build up those adult skills, those mindsets, so they can respond in a regulated way, in a way that is going to promote healing and not respond out of stress. And that's hard. This is really where I think reflective practice plays a huge role. We're having these conversations. We're really thinking about how we leverage support from one another is critical. And last but not least, we want to make sure that we are resisting re-traumatization. So anything that we implement, we want to make sure that kids who are coming to us, families who are coming to us, staff who are coming to us are leaving better off than when they came, right? So we want to make sure that we are promoting self-regulation skills for adults. We want to make sure we're supporting adults in managing their stress. We're having conversations about this frequently. We want to make sure that we're not just having conversations, but we are leveraging staff connections to say, what is it you need to feel supported? We know that so often we talk about self-care, but I've never been to a program, y'all, that has a hot tub out back where they're like, go ahead, take a dip in the hot tub, right? We have to be thinking about how we have collective care, how we have those strategies that we can use when we are in the classroom with kids. And we want to support kids in being able to develop that foundation to be able to self-regulate, to be able to have those skills, to be socially aware, to be able to be emotionally regulated as well. All right. And so this is just a little graphic that I think can be really helpful. The idea here is that being trauma-informed is amazing. You can see that in the middle with our 4 R's, but we can actually push beyond that too. We can push into those safe, supportive, and healing places. And the middle and our safe, supportive, and healing really go hand in hand. And when we are reflective, when we're integrated, when we're relationship-centered, when we are prevention-oriented, when we're able to be adaptable and have flexibility, that is kind of our secret sauce for creating those environments that are safe and supportive and healing. And it's also really important that we are able to recognize when we are in a state of trauma reaction. So again, how many of you have supported a classroom, have been in this classroom, have been in this program where everyone feels really overwhelmed, where everyone's making decisions that are completely reactive? So you're like that firefighter just running, putting out one problem, the next problem, and no one is able to have the time or the space or the reflective capacity to back up and say, you know what, instead of continuing to put out these fires, let's put the matches up. Let's be proactive. Let's be preventative. Oftentimes when we are in a trauma reactive place, things feel really fragmented. No one is feeling safe. The adults aren't feeling safe. The kids aren't feeling safe. The family's not feeling safe. The staff isn't feeling safe. And sometimes this can lead us to be really rigid. So we double down on things, even if we know they're not really working that well. We're like, well, I need to hang on to this so I don't feel like I'm losing control of everything. And the point here is not to be judgmental. there's no judgment, right, in trauma-informed care, but how do we get curious? How are we able to say, you know what, we're in a trauma reactive place. What are some of those really small steps that we can use from our trauma-informed knowledge to help us start to move out of the trauma reactive place? And this can be done with an individual, it can be done with a classroom, it can be done with an entire program, but being able to recognize where we're at, being able to recognize that an event can happen. We can be over here in safe, supportive, and healing, and one event can happen that can destabilize a system and can send us back here to trauma reactive. Having awareness of that, recognizing that, and then starting to think about what are those really small steps we can start to take to walk ourselves back over into our safe, supportive, and healing can be really empowering and can help us to, again, collect data around that, can help us to make connections around that. Okay, so for anyone who is implementing pyramid, again, pyramid model is inherently trauma-informed. So when we think about trauma-informed care in the pyramid model, we start with our effective workforce. And so we think about staff needing that training that so many of you talked about in the chat. We think about how we have that and hold that trauma-informed lens for all of the staff, all the families. We think through our tier 1, our nurturing and responsive relationships and high quality supportive environments. We know that every single child needs safe, nurturing, connected relationships and environments. We know kids who've experienced trauma thrive off of relational safety and environmental safety. And so thinking about how we build those relationships to be relationally safe, how we build our environments to be environmentally safe is so important. And thinking about the importance of predictability, thinking about the importance of consistency is huge. I know some of you were in Johanna's session earlier today where they talked about those big 5 strategies. Those big 5 strategies are there to support and prevent challenging behavior. Guess what? Those big 5 strategies, thinking about having a daily schedule that you review multiple times across the day, thinking about having behavioral expectations that are positively stated, and then giving that 5-to-1 feedback. Whoa, you used your walking feet. You used your walking feet. You are so safe. Look at you walking, right? When we are able to acknowledge kids who are doing that, when we are able to promote that emotional literacy, all of those things are trauma-informed. All of those things are going to support our kids in healing as well. We want to think about our second tier here, and we know that kids who've experienced trauma, when we think about our flip the lid brain, when we think about that house, we know they're going to need extra support in building up their regulation skills. We know they need that through co-regulation. We know that fostering friendship skills for these kids is essential. We know that really promoting their emotional regulation and thinking about how we promote their emotional literacy is a gift that keeps on giving. Kids who've experienced trauma, young children who've experienced trauma, are more likely to identify anger or fear as the top emotions on an adult's face, regardless of what emotion that the adult has. Their go-to is to say, they must be scared or they must be angry, and it must be because of something I've done. When we are able to promote emotional literacy, when we're able to support kids in developing a wide language of feeling, that is going to support their healing. That's going to support their emotional regulation. That's going to support their behavioral regulation. And then last but not least, for our kids who've experienced trauma, we want to make sure we have connections to community supports. We want to make sure that whenever we are creating individualized support plans, we're doing that through a trauma-informed lens. We're holding experiences of trauma or histories of potential trauma as we're thinking about creating these plans and the responses that we might have. And then again, how are we having connections to community supports if what we are looking at, the behavior we're looking at, might need someone like a therapist or a counselor or a clinician to support this child or this family. All right, and so there's lots of ways that we, again, that I just sort of shared that can help us within the pyramid model to think about strategies that we use. Another huge one is just really making sure we're understanding the behavior and using our trauma-informed lens to look at that. So how are we understanding what's happening? How are we really teaching those supports? How are we helping again, kids to regulate their emotions and their behaviors, and how do we start as the adult by doing that first? Carissa, I'm just reading your comment here that sometimes it can feel really difficult to think about that effective workforce piece. And again, that effective workforce is the base of our pyramid. And you're right, we have to start with the adults first, right? If we want adults who can show up and who can do this really hard relational work that is going to support healing, we have to be thinking about things like collective well-being. We have to be thinking about those policies and procedures. We have to support adults in thinking about their own activators, what gets them dysregulated, those hot buttons that might come up. And then how are we building those skills? How are we saying it's okay if you don't have these skills, but we have to be able to build them up? And that can be really difficult because it takes time, and we know there's not a ton of time, and it can take buy-in. But thinking about how we leverage some of this lens can be a start to doing that. All right, so again, we have our old way with the pyramid really focused, or the old way really focused on like, let's just reduce this behavior. Pyramid model comes in, it says, no, let's really focus on teaching new social emotional skills, strategies, competencies, practices. And then when we have our trauma-informed pyramid, we're saying, let's teach those new skills and let's focus on healing. Our old way was kind of that quick fix. As long as that behavior is going down, great. Just make it go down quickly. The pyramid model is really focusing on building that foundation, those skills that are going to support social and health outcomes and academics in the future. And sometimes that means we don't always get to see the flower from the seed we planted. Sometimes we do this really hard work and we don't always get to see the growth that we anticipated or that we wanted, but trusting that when we are doing this hard work, when we are planting those seeds, we are making a difference, whether we see the outcomes we want or not. It is laying a new foundation for that child, for the next person that they're in relationship with. We want to focus on our trauma-informed pyramid is saying we want to focus on those long-term academic, social health, and mental health outcomes. I always like to share a quick story here. So I worked with a child as a clinician in his Head Start program from early Head Start and then all through Head Start. And then I followed him to his kindergarten classroom because it was right across the street. And this was one of those kids where I was like, ugh, we're not quite there yet. We haven't quite made the progress that I know is in there, but we're not quite there. So I had to draw a limit after kindergarten. I had to say, okay, he's transitioning to a school-based clinician who's going to support him. And it was hard because he wasn't quite where I wanted him to be. He was still having really a hard time. He was still having a lot of trauma reactive behaviors. I know we were ending this really important, consistent relationship that he'd had for a long time. That was hard for me. And it didn't feel like we were ending in the most positive place, right? It was a little unknown. Well, I got a call from his school 3 years later. This little guy was in 4th grade now, and I was a little nervous when I got the message asking for me to call them back. And they called to say he was doing amazing. He was the peer model. He was helping out the younger kids. He loved to go into kindergarten. They said, 2nd grade was really rough. 1st grade was really rough. Somewhere like halfway through 3rd grade, things started to come together. The puzzle pieces started to move in and everything started to click together. And so I think about that really early work we did and think about where he was able to get to and not to be like, oh, the work we did really, made a huge difference. But I think that being able to have someone who loved him, who cared for him, who connected him, having someone who helped his teachers to understand, hey, this is a little bit of his story. This is what's happening for him. It did all come together for him. It took many, many years. It took years after I had worked with him, but it came together. And so how can we hold that hopefulness too, as we're thinking about working with our young kids who've experienced trauma? All right, so as we think about the pyramid model, again, it inherently has these embedded pieces of creating these safe and secure attachments by using relationship and the power of relationship in everything we do. It has this idea of really being able to target target and think about how we teach and practice ways to express our feelings, our fears, our beliefs, our concerns, ways to promote regulation, ways to promote co-regulation. It's rooted in routine. So we know there's so many resources that support routines, that support predictability, that support consistency. All of this is huge for creating environmental safety and relational safety. And I'm going to show you a few resources that you can add to your toolkit as well. So the first one is called A Guide for Early Childhood Professionals to Support Young Children's Resilience. And this is a pretty hefty guide, but it's amazing if you're like, you know what, I really want to go through and think about how we're using trauma-informed care specifically for our early childhood classrooms. So for any of you who are supporting K through 12 programs, a lot of times we're like, yeah, trauma-informed care, this works so great for our middle schoolers or so great for our fifth graders. It doesn't always translate down to our early childhood programs. And so this guide has taken those 6 tenets of trauma-informed care and has really made them early childhood specific, early childhood friendly. It gives a lot of examples of what you can do. And personally, my favorite part of this guide is if you go all the way to the back, so make sure you scroll all the way through, it's like 15 pages long, there are 3 different appendices that lay out all 6 tenets of trauma-informed care, and they give you specific examples of what this can look like in early childhood programs. So there's one appendice that is specific to an organizational approach, so like a full program approach. There's a different appendice that is specific to early intervention services. So anyone who's supporting EI, or if EI is pushing into your program, you can say, hey, can we look at this together? There's specific strategies there. And then the last appendix, Appendix C, is for the classroom, for early childhood classrooms. And again, it links specific practices to those 6 tenets of trauma-informed care. So this can be a great resource to promote trauma-informed care. I think a question I get a lot is like, I'm bought in. Yeah, trauma-informed care, we need to do that. What does it look like? How do I do that? These appendices can be a great way to start that conversation. And this is a QR code so that you can find this great resource, which is on challengingbehavior.org. It's the NCPMI website. All right, the next resource I want to highlight is for anyone who works with leaders. If you are a leader out there, this is a brand new resource that just came out a few weeks ago, and it's really written for leaders. So it's thinking about how leaders can be trauma-informed, how they can start to support and create a trauma-informed culture. And so this, one of the unique features about this resource that I think is so amazing is that there's a ton of reflective-based questions in there. It's got a ton of examples of what this can look like, and it can be a great conversation starter, a great jumping off place to support leaders and thinking about how are we being trauma-informed in our early childhood programs, in our early childhood classrooms. And so it has a section for thinking about families, it has a section for thinking about staff wellness and growth, and it has a section for thinking about collective data decision making, all through that trauma-informed lens. So this can be another really great resource to use. And again, I think those reflective questions in it can be really thought-provoking, can be really helpful for thinking about how trauma-informed care is integrated into the organizational culture or program culture. And this is the QR code for that resource. Okay, and then this resource, again, these are all on NCP. I feel like you're a salesperson right now. You can find these all on NCPMI, challengingbehaviors.org. This resource is written specifically for families. So if you have families who you know are experiencing a lot of stress, who may have experienced a stressful situation or experienced a traumatic situation. This is specifically written for families and what families can do to support their child after a stressful situation at home. And so there's a lot of simple strategies here that are, again, no cost, that are really thinking about giving examples. There's a big section on sort of the power of routines and being consistent. And as you read through this, you might be like, yeah, these are great strategies for all families to be doing with their kids. And I think that's part of the point. A lot of the strategies that are already being utilized in the pyramid model are best practice for every single child and family. But this one, again, also has a last little section too that speaks sort of directly to the family around thinking about how they're doing and if they may need extra support in ways that they might be able to connect to community supports or ask the program for additional supports if they're realizing that they are struggling. So that can be a nice little add-on here. So this is, again, a newer resource. I think it came out within the last couple of months, but a great one to check out, a great one for your toolkit. And the last resource, oh, here's the QR code for this one. And the last resource I have for you is this resource is a little bit different because it's really, again, thinking about considerations for working with children who you know have experienced trauma. But it can be really useful, I think, if you don't know if a child's experienced trauma too. And this one really, again, highlights that idea of relational and environmental safety. It talks a lot about trauma activators. And the way this resource is set up is that the first section is all thinking about pyramid model practices that are preventative in one section. So it gives you the practice, and then it gives you the rationale of why is it trauma informed. And what I found in some of my experiences, especially when we are getting staff buy-in for pyramid model practices, sometimes when we're saying, hey, when you do this, you are being trauma-informed, you are supporting healing, sometimes we can get a little bit more intentionality, a little bit more buy-in, so that can be helpful. And it can just be helpful to understand, why is what I'm doing trauma-informed, right? And how do we start to talk about that as a program? How am I able to explicitly make these connections myself as an educator? So the first part is all preventative. Then there's a second part for when a child is really activated. So when they are experiencing a trauma activation, so those are more de-escalation based strategies. And I know oftentimes people are looking for strategies to use to de-escalate. These are all trauma-informed strategies to support de-escalation for when kids are in the midst of that big behavior or that trauma activation. We call those our in the moment strategies. So that is all in this resource. And here's the QR code for that one. And then the last resource I have for you is a really nice sort of self-assessment. And so this is a social emotional development and trauma-informed care checklist. And so again, it's practices that teachers use all the time, and it is a self-rating skill. So you can use this to help support goal setting, to think about where you might want to be more intentional or where you might want to grow around trauma-informed care, and also where you want to celebrate, wow, I'm doing an amazing job right here. I'm doing so great on this piece. So this resource can be super helpful as well. You can use it individually. I've also seen programs use it for the whole program, and it helps them to guide some of their professional development or where they might want coaching to go. So it can be helpful in that sense too. All right. So as we are wrapping up here, I want to leave a few minutes for questions, but also I would love it if you all want to share in the chat maybe one takeaway that struck you from this conversation, or one intention that you might want to set as you are going back into your roles later this week, and one thing that you might want to think about implementing or just hanging on to as you head back into your work as it relates to trauma-informed care, as it relates to trauma and healing. So if you want to share that in the chat, that would be amazing. And I will leave a whole 3 minutes for any questions that people may have. Yay, Joan, I love that. You know, what's so funny about the house is now the team that I work on at Georgetown, we talk about it all the time. We'll be like, oh man, I'm starting to like walk up the stairs in my house, or like, oh, I'm down in the basement. It's kind of become a really nice naturalized way that we are able to talk about where we are with our own regulation. And it's normalized and something that we all have in like a common language we can use to talk about our regulation. Wendy, I love the invisible backpack too, and thinking about the power we have through relationships to repack that backpack, and what a gift and how amazing that is to be able to do that. Yeah, I love that, Jennifer. So making sure we are helping teachers to think about, staff to think about including kids and reviewing that plan with kids, right? An easy one, but such an important one. Oh, good, Erin. I'm glad you like the up, down, stop, go activity and some of the deep breathing in the house. Amazing. I don't know if there's any other questions, Allison, that popped up.
Yeah, we can wait for some to go in the chat, but I'm wondering if you can, we talked a little bit about that, that effective workforce being really the foundation, and how also this can take some time as we're working with staff. And I'm wondering if you have any guidance around where to start. So we know that within early childhood, there's a lot of turnover, right? And so time doesn't always feel like the thing that we have. And so are there some things that you would start with when you're going into those staff trainings around trauma-informed work and really creating that healing environment?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question, Allison. I think one of the best things is just like how we want to be preventative with the kids that we're working with, we want to be preventative with the adults too. And so I know that staffing is a huge challenge, the turnover is a challenge, but being able to start to create spaces and time for adults to connect, and to connect specifically around like some of the likes, some of the wants, some of how they see the classroom running, thinking about what their strengths are, thinking about, you know what, I'm horrible at paperwork. I know that about myself. Being able to share that with someone new who's coming in, whether it's a sub, whether it is a new teacher who's coming in, how are we giving time for the adults to start to connect and have some of these conversations that directly impact how they're able to be regulated in the classroom? Even just being able to say, you know what, you're the third sub I've had in the last month, and I am feeling tired. This is what would be really helpful. If you could take point on Allison in the morning, that would be amazing, because then I can show up for Allison in the afternoon. Being able to have some of these conversations preventatively, and being able to continue the conversations, not just like, oh, we did them in August at our PD day, but how are we continuing to find ways to check in, to do some of that reflection, to have conversations about the house, or to think about what do I need to be regulated as that adult to show up, and how do we promote that in our program is huge. And I think a big part of it is leaning on the group, leaning on the staff that you have, asking them, soliciting, what is it that feels important to you? What is it that feels helpful for you to be able to do this is huge.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise today, Julia. We really, really appreciate it. And we're so glad that you were able to join us in Michigan today for our conference.
Thank you all so much. And I hope that everyone takes good care of yourself. And thank you all.
And we're gonna go now into a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back on the main stage at 2:30 for our end note session today. So thank you all. And thank you so much, Julia. It was great.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it.